It started with a drawer, a locked drawer in a quiet home, in a quiet neighborhood, on a quiet evening. And when Hannah King opened it, she didn't just find old documents. She found a truth so devastating, it would cost her life. To everyone who knew them, Hannah and Griffin were the picture of a happy marriage. She was warm, devoted, active in her community. He was strong, successful, private, but steady. Together, they had the kind of life people envy. A cozy suburban home in Atlanta, matching smiles at dinner parties, and a love story that seemed unshakable. But behind Griffin King's carefully curated life was a secret he had buried so deep, even his wife didn't know it existed. Griffin had once been Grace, and for over 6 years, he kept that past locked away, hidden behind paperwork, behind a new name, behind a new body, and behind a perfect smile. He thought the lie would stay buried forever, until Hannah started noticing the changes. Late nights, whispered phone calls, cold distance in bed. And then, one night, she followed him, straight to a motel, straight into betrayal. But what she uncovered afterward made the affair seem almost irrelevant. Because what Hannah found that night wasn't just infidelity, it was identity. It was deception on a scale she never imagined. And when she confronted him, when she told Griffin she was leaving, that she would tell the truth, he snapped. And in a kitchen once filled with laughter and Sunday morning coffee, there was only blood. Stay with us, because this isn't just a story about a murder. It's a story about a man running from his past, and the woman who dared to open the drawer. Before Griffin King ever picked up a hammer or wore a wedding ring, he was Grace. Born in a small conservative town in Alabama, Grace came into the world with a quiet kind of sadness. From the outside, she was just another Southern girl, polite, modest, raised with religion and rigid expectations. But inside, something was always wrong. She hated the dresses, the forced smiles, the way adults spoke to her like she was fragile porcelain when all she wanted was to run barefoot with the boys, scrape her knees, and be seen for who she really was. But no one saw Grace, not the way she needed. At church, she prayed silently for something she couldn't name. At school, she felt like a ghost in her own skin. The first real breath she ever took came at 18, when she left home for college in Atlanta. It wasn't escape. It was resurrection. In the city, she found language for the feelings that had haunted her childhood. And with that language came clarity, and with clarity came transition. Hormones, therapy, surgery. Piece by painful piece, Grace disappeared, and Griffin emerged. It wasn't easy. There were nights of bleeding, of screaming, of wondering if it would ever be enough. But every step forward was a step closer to truth. By 25, Griffin King was a man in full, legally, physically, emotionally. To his co-workers in construction management, he was just another guy. To new friends, he was quiet but steady. To the world, his past didn't exist. And that's exactly how he wanted it. He didn't lie about who he was. He just never told the full story. Because to Griffin, Grace was dead. And dead things should stay buried. Griffin met Hannah in 2006. She was the kind of woman who lit up a room without trying. Warm, gracious, a Southern charm that wasn't performative. It was real. She volunteered at shelters, baked pies for church events, and remembered everyone's birthday. Griffin had never met anyone like her, and she had never met anyone like him. To Hannah, Griffin was calm, protective, emotionally grounded. A man who listened, who didn't interrupt, who didn't posture or brag. He wasn't flashy, But he was solid. A rare kind of man in a world full of noise. They fell in love quickly. By 2007, they were married in a quiet ceremony under a canopy of oak trees. Close friends, family, vows written by hand. Griffin wore a gray suit and smiled like he had never smiled before. But inside that smile was calculation. Because he had made a decision. She would never know the truth. Not because he didn't love her, but because he loved the version of himself she believed in. And he couldn't bear to watch that version die. He convinced himself it didn't matter anymore. He was Griffin. That was all. Grace was a chapter closed, a story no one needed to hear again. And so began the perfect mask. They bought a house in suburban Atlanta, decorated it together, dreamed of children. Griffin worked in construction management. Hannah ran community events. They hosted dinner parties, vacationed in Asheville, held hands in the pew every Sunday. On the surface, they were flawless. But underneath, Griffin lived with constant tension, always scanning for cracks in the illusion, always wondering if today would be the day the past clawed its way out of the ground. Because no matter how perfect the mask, it only takes one tear to break it. And when it breaks, it doesn't just slip off, it shatters. By early 2012, something inside Griffin had started to shift. On the outside, life remained picturesque. A charming home, a loving wife, a steady job. But on the inside, the mask was cracking. Years of secrecy, of self-suppression, of pretending to be untouchable. It all began to feel unbearable. Griffin wasn't just hiding from the world anymore. He was hiding from himself. And then came Stephanie Hart. He met her at a gym not far from his work, a place he'd started going to in the evenings under the excuse of stress relief. She was younger, striking, athletic, the kind of woman who seemed to move through the world with ease, with confidence. She wore her skin like armor and flirted like she had nothing to lose. Griffin didn't go looking for her, but once she found him, he didn't walk away. What started as casual conversation near the water fountain turned into after-session smoothies. Then texting. Then accidental meetups in the parking lot. By March 3rd, they were in a full-blown affair. It wasn't love. It was escape. With Stephanie, he didn't feel like Griffin the husband. He didn't have to think about his past. He didn't have to be perfect. He just existed. Messy, impulsive, desired, and he liked it. The secrecy, the thrill, the power of having a double life. It was dangerous. But danger, for a man who had lived half his life in hiding, didn't feel foreign. It felt familiar. Meanwhile, back home, Hannah was starting to notice. The missed calls, the late nights, the way Griffin avoided her touch in bed, the way his smile no longer reached his eyes. She didn't have proof yet, but she had something stronger, instinct. And as Griffin slipped further into his second life, Hannah quietly began preparing to uncover the first one. Hannah King had always been trusting, but she wasn't naive. She'd built her life around compassion, around community, around believing in people. But now, she felt something cold creeping into the home she once called safe. It started small. Griffin began coming home later than usual. His explanations? Vague, generic. Work's been intense. Last-minute site visit. He stopped asking her about her day, stopped noticing when she changed her hair, or stayed unusually quiet at dinner. Most nights, he fell asleep with his back turned to her. At first, she blamed herself. Maybe she'd been too distracted lately. Maybe this was just a phase. But the voice in her gut, the one she usually ignored, was screaming now. So she began watching. Not overtly. Hannah wasn't confrontational. She was careful. She paid attention to his schedule, to the names on his call log, to the tone of his voice when he thought she wasn't listening. She noted how quickly he put his phone face down when she walked into the room, how he suddenly cared more about his appearance when leaving the house, how he kept a second gym bag in the car, one she had never seen him use. The cracks in the illusion grew wider. On March 28th, Hannah made a decision that would change everything. She followed him. He said he had to meet a contractor after hours. She waited 15 minutes, then took the car and tailed him quietly. Griffin drove far from the job site, to a run-down motel on the outskirts of town. Hannah parked at a distance, heart pounding. And then she saw her. Stephanie, young, confident, smiling as she leaned into Griffin's shoulder. The two of them disappeared into a room together. Hannah sat in her car for over 2 hours, motionless, mouth dry, heart numb. When Griffin finally emerged, adjusting his shirt collar, Hannah didn't follow him home. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't even confront him that night. Instead, she waited until he was asleep, and then, with shaking hands, she crept into his study. There was a drawer she'd never been allowed to open. Until now. The room was dark, lit only by the glow of a hallway lamp. Griffin lay asleep upstairs, breathing steady, unaware that the carefully built fortress around his past was seconds away from collapsing. Downstairs, Hannah stood before his study desk, the one he always kept locked. He'd told her it was for important work documents, and she had never questioned it. Until now. The small silver key had been hidden beneath a floorboard in his closet. She found it 2 nights ago, and now it slid smoothly into the lock. Click. The drawer opened with a quiet resistance, like it knew it wasn't supposed to. Inside were files, folders, scattered paperwork, and then, tucked at the back, a thin envelope labeled Private Medical. She pulled it out, her fingers trembling. What she found wasn't what she expected. It wasn't about Stephanie. It wasn't about another woman. It was about him. Hormone therapy reports, psychological evaluations, a surgical history. The name printed on the documents, Grace Elaine King. Her hands froze. Her eyes scanned the words, trying to make sense of what she was seeing, as if she could unsee it by reading faster. It didn't work. She flipped through record after record. All of them confirmed what felt, in that moment, impossible. Griffin, her husband, had once been someone else, someone he had never mentioned, someone he had deliberately hidden. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps. Her knees buckled as she sat on the floor, the papers falling around her like snow. It wasn't just the affair. It wasn't just the lies. It was the foundation of their life together. Gone. Shattered. How could he have married her without telling her something so fundamental? How had she not seen it? In that moment, Hannah didn't feel angry. She felt erased, like the woman she'd been, the wife, the partner, the friend, had loved a ghost. And ghosts don't come clean. They haunt. April 7th, 2012. The next morning, the house felt hollow. Griffin walked through the front door after another late night with Stephanie, thinking, perhaps foolishly, that he still had time to clean up the mess, time to make decisions on his terms. But Hannah had already made hers. She didn't scream when he came in. She didn't throw anything. She was calm, terrifyingly calm. She sat at the kitchen table, a stack of papers in front of her. When he saw the envelope marked Private Medical, Griffin's breath caught in his throat. And just like that, the room turned into a tomb. She looked up at him, not with tears, with clarity. "You lied to me, Griffin," she said quietly. "Not just about her. About you." He didn't answer. "What else haven't you told me? Is there even a part of you that's real?" Griffin tried to speak, but the words tangled in his throat like wire. So she stood up. "I loved you. I built a life with you. And you never gave me the choice to know who I was marrying." Her voice shook, not with fear, but fury. "You used my love to protect your lie." Griffin tried to defend himself. He told her it didn't matter anymore. That he was Griffin now, that Grace was gone, that it didn't change how much he loved her. But Hannah wasn't listening anymore. She was done listening. "You don't get to decide what I deserve to know," she said. "You don't get to rewrite my story to make yours easier." And then she said the one thing he feared most. "I'm leaving. And I'm telling everyone." His world began to spiral. His jaw clenched. His chest tightened. Everything he had built, the identity, the career, the normalcy, stood on a precipice. And now it was about to fall. He begged. She grabbed her keys. He blocked the door. She pushed past him. And that's when something in Griffin snapped. The man who had spent a lifetime building walls tore everything down in a moment of rage. It was supposed to be just another argument. One of many, Griffin told himself. Just more yelling, more threats, more tears. But this time, she meant it. Hannah didn't just want space. She wasn't going to the guest room. She was leaving for good. And she was going to take the truth with her. He saw it in her eyes. The resolve, the heartbreak, the fury that comes from realizing the man you loved was a stranger. She turned her back to him, grabbing her purse, her keys, her phone. She didn't see him walk into the kitchen, didn't hear the drawer open, didn't see the knife in his hand. But he saw everything. He saw the fear of exposure. He saw his perfect life crumbling. He saw Grace, the name he buried, clawing its way back to the surface. He saw himself unraveling. And then he acted. In one terrible, irreversible moment, he lunged. The first blow was wild, desperate. Hannah gasped, dropped her phone, stumbled backward, clutching her side. She didn't scream. There wasn't time. He struck again, and again, and again. The kitchen, once their place for morning coffee, for Sunday pancakes, became a butcher shop of memory. Blood splattered against the white cabinets. The sound of her body hitting the tile echoed like thunder. Then, silence. Griffin dropped the knife. He stood over her, hands shaking, chest heaving. The woman who loved him. The woman who believed in him. The woman who had every right to know the truth. Lay in a pool of blood, eyes open, unmoving. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. Because there were no words for what he'd just done. Only silence. And the sound of the lie, finally, violently, exploding. But the lie didn't die with her. Now it had a body. And soon, it would need a cover story. Griffin stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the aftermath of his own unraveling. The blood on the floor was starting to dry. Hannah's body, still contorted, pale, was no longer a person to him. She was evidence, and evidence had to be erased. That's when survival mode took over. He grabbed gloves, bleach, old towels. He wiped every surface, every drop of blood, scrubbing until his fingers ached. He changed his clothes, washed the knife. Then he ransacked the living room, pulled out drawers, flipped furniture, smashed the window over the sink. The story had to be believable. It was a robbery, he told himself, a break-in gone wrong. He left the back door ajar, tossed valuables around, then waited until noon before calling 911, letting the panic build in his voice, rehearsing the grief, the shock, the innocence. When the officers arrived, Griffin played the part well, devastated, confused, a loving husband who'd come home to find his wife slaughtered. And, for a moment, they believed him. But grief is hard to fake, and murder, even well-staged, has a smell. Within days, the cracks began to show. A neighbor told police they heard shouting the night before. Another recalled Hannah pacing in her yard days earlier, visibly upset. Stephanie, the other woman, showed up unannounced, confused why Griffin had ghosted her. She demanded answers. She got silence. Detectives took notes. The robbery didn't add up. Nothing had been stolen. No forced entry. And the broken window? The glass had shattered outward, not inward. It was staged. Then came the forensics. Griffin's DNA under Hannah's nails. Microscopic blood traces on his discarded gym clothes. And finally, the drawer. Detectives found it unlocked. Inside, the medical documents, untouched. The truth was still there, waiting. And then they found Hannah's phone. In her notes app, a message she never sent. If something happens to me, Griffin is not who you think he is. That wasn't just a red flag. It was a death sentence. The walls were closing in. And Griffin King, the man who had spent his whole life hiding, was about to face the one thing he feared most. Exposure. April 20th, 2012. The arrest was quiet. Griffin didn't fight. He didn't cry. As officers placed the cuffs around his wrists, he stared straight ahead. Not at the neighbors who watched from their porches, not at the officers, not even at the blood-stained kitchen being sealed behind him. He knew it was over. At the station, he tried to stick to his story. The robbery, the shock, the grief. But the detectives had stopped listening. They had the timeline. They had the blood. They had the message on Hannah's phone. And they had Stephanie, now furious, confused, and betrayed, who testified that Griffin had become erratic and desperate in the final weeks. Under the weight of it all, he cracked. Griffin confessed, not in a moment of remorse, but of resignation. He admitted to the affair, admitted to the lie, admitted to the rage, but he still called it an accident. He said he snapped. He said he just wanted her to stop. The trial began on May 3rd and quickly became a media storm. Every day the courtroom was packed. Reporters, curious onlookers, grieving friends. People weren't just there for the murder. They were there for the story. A transgender man who had hidden his past from his wife, a secret life, an affair, a sudden act of violence. The prosecution painted Griffin not as a trans man, but as a manipulator. A man who built his identity on lies, who feared truth more than blood. They didn't demonize his transition. They condemned his deception. The jury took just 6 hours. On June 15, 2012, Griffin King was found guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The aftermath was a scar the community wouldn't forget. Friends of Hannah, who once admired her perfect marriage, now questioned every conversation they'd ever had. Stephanie Hart disappeared from the public eye, her name forever tied to a man she never truly knew. And Griffin? He spends his days in silence, behind bars, with no more secrets left to keep, only memories to rot in. The life he built on lies came crashing down with the truth.